A man would say that a young girl's ghost is what finally got him to confess to her murder. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Carrie and Jopek. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. I tell true crime stories over here on YouTube 3 times a week. Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. Stop doing that. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. Give this video a like. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. That's where I'm mostly known from. I have about 3 million followers or so over there. Also called Making a True Crimerer. It will be linked in the description of this video below in the link tree, where you can also find my Discord server. Feel free to join it, but be over the age of 18 or else you'll be kicked out. You'll find my link to my merch store if you want to buy any merch. We do ship all over the world. And then lastly, if there's a case you want me to cover, just email me at makingatruecrimerertwo.com and just email me the name of the person, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to my list. That email, by the way, is also listed below. Give me some time though, because I pick my cases at random, so it may be a while before I cover that case, but I will do it at some point. Anyway, let's get into today's case. Carrie Ann Jopek was born on August 17th, 1968 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Carrie was one of 2 girls. She had a sister named Maggie. The 2 of them were really close. They were the best of friends growing up. At the time of this story, Carrie was living with her mom, Carolyn, her stepfather, Fred, and the sister, Maggie. And they lived in this, what was considered to be an incredibly safe neighborhood. It was just a good neighborhood for families to raise kids in. There really wasn't any crime in this neighborhood. You know, there weren't issues with parents concerned if their kids were outside playing and, hanging out, about any nefarious characters wandering around. And it was a different time as well. Carrie's mom would describe Carrie as just this beautiful young girl. She was incredibly artistic. She did really well in school. She did have, some issues with getting into trouble from time to time, but she got really good grades and she excelled in her educational wise. She was also kind of a stubborn girl. She was someone, if her mom told her what to do, she would basically do the exact opposite thing. She was rebellious in that way. And she was also someone that, if you were like a kid at school picking on her, or she saw you picking on someone else, she wasn't afraid to stand up for herself or someone else. Carrie was attending, and I'm probably going to say this very wrong, Kosciuszko Middle School in Milwaukee. Please correct me if I said that way wrong, which I'm sure I did. And it was March 16th, 1982. She was in the 7th grade there at the middle school, and apparently there was a situation where a boy made fun of the outfit she was wearing, or he spilled something on her outfit and it made her mad, and so I guess she punched him and she got into trouble, obviously, and was suspended for, I think, a couple of days. So she was going to be sent home at 1:30 p.m. that day. Now, the walk from her school to her home was 3 or 4 minutes. It was a nothing walk. She did it all the time. The school had called her mom and said, hey, she did this and she's being suspended. And her mom's like, okay, well, she's a big girl. She can walk on her own. Basically, in this, she was just like, all right, well, she doesn't need me to hold her hand. She can get here. When she does, we'll have a conversation. The thing is Carrie never got to her home. She never opened the door and walked in. And so her mom was just like, okay, well, where the hell is she? Maybe she is being just more rebellious today, and she just sort of stormed off and, she'll be home later. But then night fell and Carrie still wasn't home. And at that point, her mom and her sister were very concerned. Across the street from the Jopek house was Carrie's friend's house. Her friend's name was Robin Matt. So her mom would walk over there, knock on the door, say, hey, is Carrie over here by chance? When the door was open, the mom noticed there were several kids in the house, as if some kind of social gathering, maybe a party was going on. But Robin said, no, I haven't seen her. And the other kid said, nope, we haven't seen her either. Then about 10 or 11 o'clock that night, that's when, Carrie's mom rounds up the troops of the neighborhood, and they get a bunch of people to just start looking throughout this entire neighborhood. And there's a lot of houses in this neighborhood. It's a very heavily dense residential neighborhood, bunch of houses, not a lot of free open space. But they're going through every alley, they're knocking on doors, they're doing everything they can to find her. They have no luck. Because Carrie did have a defiant streak in her, there was that thought in the back of their minds of, well, okay, she's just being she got suspended, she got mad, and so she's just taken out her anger and she ran away for maybe a night or something. Carrie's biological father lived kind of nearby. They did call him to see hey, has Carrie gone over there at all? Has she called you or anything? He said, nope, haven't seen her, haven't heard from her. He himself had been at work the entire day, and which was confirmed. Police were then notified, and within a day or so, the media had Carrie's image all over the place. They were now all just going in on trying to find this missing 13-year-old child. At that point, after, a day or so goes by, they realize this isn't a runaway situation, because Carrie had never really run away from home like this. And even though she could be stubborn and defiant, she had never done anything like this before. And this was just so unusual that her family definitely felt that something else happened. Over the next week or so, police and the family would be getting a bunch of calls and tips I've seen Carrie here, I've seen Carrie there, and here and there. They were all false sightings because they went to verify all of this and they couldn't corroborate any of it. They couldn't say for certain that these people were saying they saw was Carrie. This was a time when, especially in Milwaukee, this area of Milwaukee, where kids just weren't kidnapped or abducted or murdered or anything. And so they were still holding on to hope that this was just a runaway, even though it's unusual for her. That's what they were holding on to, is that hope. But at the same time, they have to investigate this as a missing child and possibly a foul play scenario. So they start interviewing people, especially her mom. They interview her sister. They interview the biological father. They interview the stepfather, Fred. Apparently, Carrie and Fred got into a lot of arguments. Carrie was bullheaded. Fred is bullheaded. And so they kind of clashed a lot. She always had the mentality of, well, you're not my actual dad, so I don't have to listen to you. And it always tended to make him upset, to make him mad, and so they just argued a lot. Police noticed that there was fresh concrete laid in the yard of the Jopek house, that Fred had laid fresh concrete, which of course, in a situation like this, is unusual. Fred's listen, I didn't do anything to Carrie. We argued a lot, but I love that girl. She is like a daughter to me. And he said, the concrete was for something just completely unrelated. And so police were still we're going to check. So they brought in the ground penetrating radar system, and they were trying to see if they can find anything, but they ended up finding nothing. There was nothing unusual about it. And at a certain point, they said, all right, Fred is likely not a suspect because first and foremost, he had an alibi, and that was pretty much it. That was what cleared him. And then they started to focus on the neighbor across the street, the Mant house, and in particular, a young boy named Johnny Mant, or John. He was 17 years old. He was the older brother of Carrie's friend, Robin. Carrie and Robin were sisters. They were the best of friends. They hung out all the time. Well, according to Carrie's mom, John had started to flirt with Carrie. She said, it seemed like he had a crush on her, maybe was trying to ask her out. But obviously he was 17, she was only 13. So it was unusual, it was strange. John had issues getting into trouble at school. He also had, been arrested for stealing before. And apparently he had a history with drugs and alcohol in terms of acquiring it in order to sell it or provide it to, other kids, younger kids in the neighborhood. When he was interviewed by police, he said, I have no idea where she is. I hadn't seen her that entire day. I was home alone that afternoon. And there wasn't really anything they could do to connect him to anything that may have happened to Carrie, because again, Carrie still hasn't been found, and so they don't really even know what happened to her. Well, a year and a half later, they would finally get the answers to what happened to her. It was September of 1983. The Mant family was doing some renovations on their home, and that included, I think, remodeling their patio on their backyard. They were going to be putting in a big deck. And so that required the contractors, the construction guys to start digging and all that. And one day they're digging and their shovel hits something kind of hard. And when they lift their shovel up, there's like strands of hair. And they're like, whoa. And so they begin to like kind of wipe away at the dirt and they notice a bone. And then like this huge, awful odor just like wafted up once the dirt kind of cleared. And it smelled like death. And as they continued to dig, they found basically skeletal remains of a person. It was a body that was lying in a fetal position. According to witnesses, John was out there when they were doing this and when they discovered this body. And reportedly, according to the construction guys, Johnny began to visibly freak out and then he vomited. And it kind of looked as if like, oh my God, they discovered what I've done. It was almost like a shit, now I'm in trouble kind of reaction. So police arrived, they had to, basically cordon off the entire area and they carefully removed the remains. They did notice the outfit that was on these remains. The description of the outfit kind of began to spread across the neighbors. That's when Carrie's mom heard the outfit and one of Carrie's friends heard it. And they all knew right then and there that that was the outfit Carrie was wearing the day she disappeared. And they all knew who that body was. About a week later, after dental records came in and they were able to compare it, they confirmed that this was the body of 13-year-old Carrie Ann Jopek. The coroner said that she died from, bleeding into her skull. She had a severe neck injury, almost like her neck was broken. And then she had an injury to the side of her head that could have been from an accidental fall, they said, or possibly someone with blunt force, like trauma, that they did that to her head. The first person that they hone in on at that point, of course, is Johnny Mant. And so it goes like wildfire around this entire neighborhood. Oh my God, this must be Johnny because she was buried under the Mant property. But police just there was nothing they could say to link him specifically to it. They questioned him. He denied having anything to do with it. He knew her well. That's why he threw up when, they saw this body, because his first thought, he said, was, oh my God, this must be Carrie. But as police start questioning Johnny and other people, like other, neighborhood kids and other friends, that's when police discovered that there was actually a party at the Mant house the night that Carrie would have disappeared. This was almost a year and a half, 2 years later. That's the first time police even heard about a party at this house. No one had ever mentioned that before. As you had kids basically saying there was a party, there was also like a whole other side of kids saying there was no party. Johnny said there was no party. So they were very confused about what happened at the house that night. So they had to kind of take this whole party idea and kind of just put it to the side for now because they couldn't get a straight story. Then someone else in the neighborhood would come forward to police that they saw a young man, like a friend of the Mants, I guess, at the Mant house a lot in the days after Carrie's disappearance. One person said they saw this young man kind of crying next to a dirt patch or a hole or something near the backyard of the Mant house. And this witness said they saw him putting his hands up and doing this and crying and just sort of he seemed very upset. And they identified that person as 17-year-old Jose Ferreira. So police were able to find him. They brought him in. They questioned him. They interviewed him for some time. He did admit that, yep, he knew Carrie. He also denied that a party happened at the Mant house that night. And he says he has no idea how Carrie ended up underneath this porch of the Mant house. And he said he had nothing to do with it. Over the course of time, this Jose Ferreira kid would end up kind of going to the Jopek house and just sort of talking to them about Carrie and just like about, in the time of when she was missing, but also after she was found. And he ended up kind of just sort of befriending the Jopek family. And he became like a surrogate son almost. Like they would invite him to family functions and parties and dinners. And this is because, Jose was this person who says he knew Carrie, he cared for her, he was so sad about what happened to her, and the family just sort of wanted that connection to someone who knew Carrie. But for the next 33 years, the case just went unsolved. It was cold. Police got very few leads, very few tips. There was no physical evidence that they could, at least then, link to any particular person. They were at a loss for who did this. They do feel that there had to have been a party that night. When Carrie's mom went over there, they probably just said Carrie wasn't there because she was trying to hide from her mom. But no one wants to talk about this party and what went on there. What happened? Is this party, is that what something happened that led to her death? They don't know. But it was just sort of like this theory that something had to have happened at the Mant house because that's where she was found. And then on October 11th, 2015, a man would call the news station WISN 12, and he says he wanted to confess to a murder. He says, "I want to confess to killing Carrie Ann Jopek." And the news station was finally able to convince him, because he didn't want to reveal who he was at first, but finally they convinced him to say, listen, you need to go to police with this, because this person was stating that he had been haunted by the ghost of Carrie Ann Jopek over the past 30 plus years, and that her ghost just overwhelmed him. It filled him with regret and so much sadness, I guess, that it finally weighed enough on him that he finally decided to confess. And so the news station convinces him to go to police, and the man walks into the police station and says, I want to confess to the murder of Carrie Ann Jopek. And that man was Jose Ferreira. That day, Jose woke up and told his wife that he had killed Carrie. And then he called the news station, which then led to him going to the police. He had said he wasn't sure if he wanted to go out in a blaze of glory or go out in silence or go out with the truth and taking responsibility. That's when Jose says there was a party that night. I met Carrie actually for the first time at that house party at the Mant house. The parents were not home that night. They had the Mant parents worked night jobs, and so they were gone. And so they never knew about this party taking place. Jose admitted to police that he was drunk. He was also on several drugs that night. He saw Carrie, he took a liking to her, thought she was pretty, and started to talk to her. He said that he offered her some weed, and they were just talking for some time. He then asked her, hey, do you want to go down to the basement with me? And she said, okay. That's when he says that as they're walking down the stairs, because the basement was considered like where they would all go to hang, to make out, whatever, and Carrie knew that. He said that she became nervous halfway down the stairs and says, you know what, I changed my mind. I don't think this is a very good idea. And then Jose says he tells her, no, you're going down the stairs. He says he then pushed her, which then forced her to go down the stairs, and it caused her to fall. She was unconscious now on the floor on her back, and he says that this was his opportunity to take advantage of the situation. From what I understood, he must have sexually assaulted her. He didn't realize that he was doing that to a dead girl, because Carrie had broken her neck from that fall, and she had smashed her head on the side of the concrete ground, which fractured her skull. She was dead. He realized afterwards that, oh my God, she is dead. And so he freaks out. He panics. He notices there is a door on the outside of this basement that leads to kind of like the backyard area. So he drags her where nobody else can see this happening. He manages to dig a pretty shallow grave to put her body in, and then puts the dirt back over her. And then he just went back to the party. And the next 30 some odd years, he just acted as if he didn't do anything. But secretly, he was being haunted by what he did. And The coroner report would basically essentially match up with what he said, because the broken neck and the fracture to her skull would all line up with a fall down a staircase and landing on the concrete below. They also had no evidence to prove otherwise, meaning like they didn't have any physical evidence to prove that this was like a premeditated murder, that he had snapped her neck, that he had hit her over the head with anything. They had no evidence to prove that. All they had was his story of what happened. He was admitting to killing her. And so he was arrested and he was charged with her murder. This obviously upset the Jopek family, because over the past couple of decades, they had taken him into their lives as one of their own. He had put himself into that family's lives, knowing full well that entire time he was the one responsible for her murder. And he would reiterate again to everyone that, you know, he was just haunted by Carrie's ghost, that she just kept coming back to him, haunting him, telling him he needs to come forward, he needs to admit to what he did. Jose Ferreira would end up taking a plea deal, and this was with approval from Carrie's family, because one, a trial would be lengthy. A trial would not necessarily lead to a guaranteed conviction, because there was no physical evidence actually suggesting he did this. And there were still people out there who were trying to say, even his own defense lawyers, even after he confessed, were like, well, actually, Johnny did it. Johnny Mand killed her. He's just covering for him. But, I mean, Jose was like, I did this. So essentially, what they would end up doing is he would plead guilty to attempted second-degree sexual assault with the use of force and false imprisonment. He was not actually charged with physical murder, again, because the evidence was hard to really prove that, even though they had a confession. And so he was sentenced to 7 years. The statute of limitations had actually passed on those 2 charges, but Jose would agree to basically waive that and say, I will take accountability and I will plead guilty to it anyway, and I will be sentenced for it. He said in court, I just want this to be over and done with. So he was put in jail for 7 years. He may still be there. I'm not sure exactly when precisely he was convicted, but he may be at the very end of his sentence. But at the very least, if you want to call it justice, at least Carrie and Jopek got some form of justice at the minimum. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dong. So I found it interesting. Don't do that creepy laugh. Hi. Hey, look at, I got new guys. Look at, I got new guys. I got clowns, and I got a Daenerys on the throne. You dumb bitch for killing everyone. You deserve to die. Spoiler alert. Sorry about that. Look at, they're fun. I'm a nerd, right? I'm kind of a nerd. Do you forgive me? What am I doing? I don't know. Anyway, bye. Get out of here. Get out of here. You're not welcome here. You gone? Good. Please come back.